Good evening, friends. Tonight we're going to be studying chapters 4 and 5 of Masechet Shabbos. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Shleimai. In chapter 4, we're going to be talking about hatmana. Hatmana means to insulate. Literally, the word hatmana or taimin means to hide. In what substances can we hide food? And so, of course, we have to do this before Shabbos. And so the question is what can we use to insulate food before Shabbos? Now, the rabbis only allowed substances that do not increase the heat of the item that you're putting in. So let's use a pot of chicken soup, for example. You want to insulate the chicken soup before Shabbos. So you want to take the pot and surround it with something. Now, the Mishna is going to discuss items that one may use to surround the pot, to insulate the pot, and others that you cannot use. And the reason that you cannot use them is because these items, when you take a pot of hot soup or anything else and you put it into this substance, the heat, the reaction of these materials will actually cause the heat of the pot to increase. Now, although on a biblical level this would be permitted because you're only not allowed to heat with fire, the rabbis were concerned that if they would allow you to use substances that increase heat and use those substances in order to surround your pot and insulate your pot, you may come to use hot ash with live coals. And live coals with ash in there, you are likely to then stoke it at a later point to generate even more heat. And so the rabbis forbade using anything that is going to increase the level of heat in the item that you're trying to insulate, even though there's no fire in these items. Let's go right into Mishna Aleph and let's see which items are what. Okay. With what substances can we insulate a pot before Shabbos, and with what substances can we not use to insulate a pot before Shabbos? You cannot use mark, which is like the pulp of olives, and you now take this and paste it around the pot because this is going to increase the heat of the pot. And nor can you use manure for this purpose, and not with salt, and not with lime, and nor can you use sand, in all these cases, whether they are moist or whether they are dry, they are going to generate heat, and they're going to increase the heat of the pot. When they're moist, it's going to increase the heat in the pot greatly. When they're dry, it's only going to increase the heat just a little bit. But regardless of this, you may only use, you may not use these substances regardless of whether they're moist or dry. Now, I apologize. I realized that it was private. This live broadcast was under the private designation, so there are those who are just tuning in now can only see now. So let's do, for the sake of those who are coming on just now, we're going to give a quick review of the first Mishnah of what we've learned so far. So we explained that the rabbis do not allow one to insulate a pot before Shabbos, a hot pot before Shabbos, with something that is going to increase the heat. And the reason for this is because then if they allow that, people may mistakenly think that they can use a hot ash with live coal in there, and then we're afraid that they may stoke the coal. So again, let's review the Mishnah quickly, and we'll continue. What can we use to insulate? What can we use to insulate a pot before Shabbos? Says the Mishnah, you cannot use not mark, not manure, not salt, not lime, or sand in any of these cases, whether they're wet or dry, because they are going to increase the heat. When they're wet, they will increase the heat a lot. When they're dry, they will increase the heat only a little bit. And you can't use straw either, because it's going to increase the heat. Nor with grape seeds, with grape skins. Grape skins, if you wrap it around the pot, it's going to increase the temperature of the pot. Nor can you use unprocessed soft material like cotton or wool, or shreds of worn out clothing, because again, all of this will increase the heat of the pot. And you can't use grasses when they are moist. However, grasses, once they are dried out, if you insulate a pot with this dried out grass, so the Mishnah essentially is telling us is that they will not increase the heat of the pot that you're looking to insulate, and so therefore it would be acceptable to insulate a pot like with dry grass before Shabbos. Now the Mishnah continues: you may insulate hot food with a blanket or with clothing, or with produce, or with pigeon feathers, or with carpenter's sawdust. If you collect carpenter's sawdust and you create a paste around the pot in order to insulate it, in all of these cases, in the later part of the Mishnah, all of these are allowed. Or with fine flax combings. In all of these cases, the common denominator is that when you're going to insulate the pot will retain its heat somewhat, but it will not increase the temperature. Rabbi Yehuda allows only coarse combings. He's arguing in this last instance. Only coarse combings he allows, but with fine combings, fine shreds of these flax or wool or linen, he does not allow it, because he holds that it will indeed raise the temperature. Mishnah Beis continues the subject. We may insulate hot food before Shabbos with pelts. What are we referring to? We're referring to an animal hide that the hair of the hide has not been removed. So ordinarily speaking, if you're not using this on Shabbos to insulate, or before Shabbos to insulate a pot, these would be still considered muktzah, because there's no other use for it, and they would be set aside. Says the Mishnah, if a person uses this for the purpose of insulating this pot before Shabbos, says the Mishnah, the Mishnah tells us a novel idea, that although ordinarily speaking there would be muktzah, in this instance, because one is using it and one is setting it for the use of insulating a pot before Shabbos, you can move it on Shabbos and it's no longer muktzah. In addition, or further, begizei tzemer, with wool sharings, you can insulate a pot with wool sharings. But you cannot move them on Shabbos. Why? Because they're muktzah machzis chisarim kis. They are muktzah Machmas chisarin kis means because you're concerned about the value of it. When you're using fresh wool shearings, one would typically be concerned that they're going to get soiled with the food. And so you're concerned about ruining the fresh wool shearings. And you're concerned that, like I said, food is going to get onto it. Now, anything that a person is overly concerned about on Shabbos cannot be used. It's muktzah, it's set aside, because he doesn't want to ruin it. So that's one of the ways an item becomes muktzah, set aside, is because it's not generally used for these types of purposes. And when one uses it, one is very concerned about its safety. So now, here the Mishnah tells us that you can indeed use the wool shearings, but you can't move them. So how do you how do you uncover the pot and access the food in which you use the shearings of wool to insulate? So says the Mishnah, Ketzad huesa, so how does he remove it if they're muktzah? Says the Mishnah, Noitel asakisei, so he could pull off the cover of the pot. So now you have a cover of a pot, and there's a knob on top of the cover of the pot, and on top, surrounding that, is these wool shearings. So you're not touching the wool shearings, you're touching the top of the pot. And the top of the pot, now when you pick up the pot, the wool shearings fall off, and only the ones on the side of the pot remain. And so that's acceptable because you didn't move the muktzah in a direct fashion. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah says, Kupa, if they're in a box, so if you have a pot, and the pot is in a box, and with surrounding the pot are these wool shearings, says the Mishnah, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Kupa matalat tzida v'noitel. The kupa, you can turn the box to the side, and you can lift out the pot, and then you can take food from the pot while it's still in the box. Now, why would you do this? What he's concerned is now, these wool shearings that have now been packed around the pot that's in this box, and now what's going to happen is after you're finished eating, you want to preserve the heat in the food for a little bit later on. So now, if Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah is concerned, if you pull out the pot, so the wool shearings may fall into the box, and then you won't be able to put the pot back and insulate and keep it warm for later use. So therefore, he gives us this idea, and he tells us, don't pull it out of the box, just lean it over, take your ladle, get the food out, and leave the insulation around the box. The Chachamim say, again, he's also concerned that if you're going to, he's not just giving you a suggestion, a good idea. He's telling you don't take it out of the box. Because if you do, he's afraid that you're going to rearrange the wool shearings in the box so that you can get the pot back in. And that would be prohibited because now you're moving the muktzah object, which is the wool shearings. And so therefore he disallows you from taking out the pot of the box. And again, within the box, it's surrounding, the wool shearings are surrounding the pot. The Chachamim say, they're not worried, they're not concerned about such an instance. They say you can pull out the pot and you can put it back. Now the Chachamim agree, by the way, that it's muktzah. And if for whatever reason your little contraption here falls in and collapses in the box after you've pulled out your pot, the Chachamim would agree that you're not allowed to rearrange it because it's muktzah. However, they say you can take your chances, and if it doesn't, so you can put the pot back, and if not, then you can't put the pot back. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, he's concerned that you're going to come to move these wool shearings which are muktzah, and he doesn't allow it in the first instance. If a person did not cover a pot that has hot food in it while it is still daytime, you can no longer cover the pot once it becomes dark, even if it's off the fire. If a person covered the pot before Shabbos and now it became uncovered because he wanted to remove some food, he can replace the cover of the pot, the lid of the pot, without issue, even after Shabbos has started. Mishna concludes the Perek. A person can fill a bottle of cold water. Here we're giving you the laws, not of hot beverages, of hot things, foods and beverages that you want to insulate. But here the Mishnah is telling us that cold beverages, you have something that's cold and you want it to retain its cold temperature. It's the summertime or whatever it is. Says the Mishnah, a person can fill his canteen, a jug, a bottle, whatever it is, with cold water or cooked food that has become now cold, and he wants to maintain the coldness of the food or beverage. And he can put it under a cushion or under a bolster. In other words, the law is that when it comes to cold foods, we don't have issues with insulation. That concludes chapter 4. We're going to continue moving forward on to chapter 5. Now, chapter 5 discusses a new topic. The law is of course, as we've explained many times in the past during our Mishnah studies, the law is that a person is not allowed to carry from a private domain to a public domain on Shabbos, or from a public domain to a private domain. Furthermore, within a public domain itself, a person is not allowed to pick up an item and walk more than 4 cubits in a public domain and then put down that said item. So now, the law is it's not just a person who's not allowed to do this, but even an animal that's owned by a Jew, also has to keep Shabbos, quote unquote. As the Torah tells us that your ox and your donkey must rest on Shabbos. So you can't put your ox and donkey to work on Shabbos. Included in this prohibition is you're not allowed to have your ox or your donkey carry a burden from a private domain to a public domain, or from a public domain to a private domain, or as we explained earlier, just like a person, it can't pick up something in a public domain, walk 4 cubits, and then have it put down. And so, the rule is that there are many things that an animal would typically wear during the weekday that they're not allowed to wear on Shabbos if they're going to go from a private domain to a public domain or move within a public domain. Now, there are 6 categories of items that an animal cannot carry on Shabbos, just like a human being cannot carry. There are 6 things that an animal can't carry. Number 1, a burden. You can't put a backpack of items or anything else. You can't put a burden on an animal and allow it to go from a private domain to a public domain or any other, or public, or vice versa, as we explained before. Furthermore, gear that is insufficient to control an animal, so you're not allowed to use that, you're not allowed to put that on an animal, on a specific animal, and then allow it to go from a public domain to a private domain or vice versa on Shabbos. Because since it's insufficient to control the animal, it doesn't fit the purpose. And so carrying it is carrying it for no reason. Furthermore, the 3rd category is something which is excessive. It's used to control an animal, but you don't need such a strict way or an excessive manner to control the animal. So because it's excessive, the excessiveness is considered a burden on the animal, and so therefore it cannot carry outside on Shabbos. 4, something that can become dislodged from the animal and fall down on Shabbos when it's outside in a public domain, and we're concerned that the owner of this said item that is easily dislodged will then forget it's Shabbos. He's walking with his animal on Shabbos, so it'll become dislodged, and now he wants to save it, so he'll pick it up, and he himself will then come to carry it. And so the rabbis disallowed this. So that's the 4th category. The 5th category is that this is a rabbinical prohibition, something that is generally used to lead an animal to the market for sale is not considered a Shabbos type behavior. And so it's not Shabbos-like to have the animal wear such a thing. A person says, hey, Mr. So-and-so is leading his animal to the market to sell it on Shabbos, and the rabbis have forbade selling and buying on Shabbos. So therefore, an item that's used for this purpose may not be used on Shabbos. Furthermore, objects that are worn for ornamental purposes for an animal may not be used on Shabbos as a rabbinical decree. So let's see the Mishnah inside. Once again, we're continuing now, and we're beginning with the next chapter, chapter 5 in Masechet Shabbos. With what can an animal go out on Shabbos? Into a public domain from a private domain, and then of course vice versa. A camel can go out with a rope tied to its mouth. And camels are relatively calm animals. And being that they're relatively calm, and a rope tied to their mouth is sufficient to control a camel. And so anything more than that would be considered a burden because it would be excessive way of controlling the camel. However, a female naka, it's a different type of camel, which is much more difficult to control. So such a camel, the khatam, can go in with a nose ring. A nose ring is a more stricter and stronger way of controlling the animal. But this animal requires that much, the more comprehensive manner of control, because it's not as tame as a regular standard camel. The luvdikis and a Libyan donkey, which is more powerful than other donkeys, and so therefore it requires a more powerful restraint before mibya. For such a thing, you need a bit. And this is a bit that includes the harness and that encloses the head and the jaw. And of course, this is getting more excessive, but it is needed in order to control a Libyan donkey. Besus b'sheir, a horse with a neck chain. So if you have a horse with a neck chain on it, and then you tie a rope to this neck chain, so that is sufficient for a horse, and you can use it to lead a horse in a public domain, from a private domain to a public domain. And anything that wears a neck chain, anything that would normally wear a neck chain, any animal that's controlled using a neck chain and then a rope to the neck chain, yetzim b'sher. So not just a horse, but any animal can go with this neck chain and a rope tied to it. And v'nimshachim b'sher, they can be pulled with this neck chain directly as well. Now the Mishnah concludes with two ideas. Umazan aleyin, these neck chains that are on an animal, mazan aleyin, they can be sprinkled with mechatas, with the water of the pora aduma. The pora aduma is the red heifer, which is burnt. It's completely red. It's burnt in a special procedure that we learn in Parshas, in Masechet Pora, and it is very strict rules about how you spritz it, when you spritz it, and all the different rules that we're going to talk about there. But in any case, the Mishnah's novel idea here is that you don't have to remove this neck chain from the animal if it became impure in order to purify it. You can leave it on the animal, and you can spritz the mechatas, the poraduma water, onto the chain while the animal is still wearing it. The tevulim kema, if it had it become impure. The tevulim kema, and as well as a different law that Mishnah tells us that if it became impure but it didn't require the mechatas. It only needed to be immersed in a mikvah. So you can immerse the entire animal into the water, and the neck chain will be purified. And the novel point here is that you don't have to be worried that it's going to be too tight for the water to get all over this chain while you're immersing it. So, for example, if you have an animal that uses a neck chain, like we said, a horse, for example, and the horse goes into the water, and this neck chain had become impure, so the animal goes through the river and it dunks its head into the river. As soon as it gets its head up above the water, since it's immersed in the river, now it's already purified. Mishna Beis. Chamor, a donkey, yetzis b'mardas, may go out with a saddlecloth. Donkeys are generally cold, and in order to warm them up, they would put them on this saddle blanket in order to keep it warm. So says the Mishnah that you could have your donkey go out into a public domain with this saddle blanket on, with this blanket on. But the Mishnah tells us that you have to tie it to it. We're afraid that if it's not tied, that it will fall down. And as we mentioned before we began, that we're concerned they'll pick it up, and then he himself, the owner himself, will walk 4 cubits in a public domain with this. Scharim, rams, yetzin levuvin, they go strapped. It was called levuvin because this was a special fabric, a leather fabric that was used to cover the genitals of the rams. And they would put this on so that he can't copulate with the ewes. Farmers, sometimes they want the animals to copulate, and sometimes they don't want them to copulate. And so there was this special item called the levuvin. It was a heart-shaped thing that would cover the organ of the ram, and it would be impossible for the ram to copulate with the ewes at such a time. Now, again, assuming the reason was sometimes they didn't want them to copulate. Now, here the Mishnah tells us the other way. What about a ewe, which is the female? If you're looking to invite males to copulate with it, so they would tie up the tail of the ewe, tie it up on the back, so that it would be easy access for the male to copulate. And the farmers, when they were trying to invite the males, so they would tie up the tail. So says the Mishnah, the female ewes may go out tied up, exposing them to the males. In addition, kfules, they can go out from a private domain to a public domain with their tail tied down. And of course, this would be done in order to prevent the males from copulating. In addition, the females can go out with a cover. This special cover was put around them in order to protect their wool from becoming soiled and to keep the female wool from remaining soft and not getting hard in the sun. And so says the Mishnah that the females can go out with this special covering. This was typically only done for the females whose wool were softer. Ha'izim yetzim tzrureis. She-goats may go out with their udders. They're tied up. There were 2 reasons why farmers would tie up the udders. One is that if they wanted the she-goats to become pregnant again, so one of the ways they would accomplish this is they would tie up the udders and not allow the the little kids to suckle, and when the milk would dry up, their fertility would now, this would cause them to be able to become more fertile, and they can conceive again. That's one reason why they would tie it up, and that was more of a permanent tying until the milk had dried up. There was another reason they would tie it up, which was a temporary tying, and that was if the she-goats were filled with milk, so they would want to tie it to protect the milk so that the milk doesn't drip all over the place. Now, Rabbi Yossi disallows in all of these cases. He says that these are all considered burdens on the animal. The animal does not need it for itself, except for the ewes that were covered up to keep the wool clean. This was considered like an attire according to Rabbi Yossi, and so therefore he only allows that instance, and all the other instances he disallows, saying it's a burden on the animal. Rabbi Yehuda takes a different approach. He says, when it comes to the she-goats and with their udders tied, so he says they can go out if the purpose of the tying up is to dry out the milk so that they can become more fertile. That's acceptable. That's more of a permanent, long-term winding of and wrapping of the udders. But in order to protect the milk, this is not acceptable. Now, Mishna Gimel. With what may an animal not go out? So before we started off with a whole bunch of things that an animal could go out, according to the Tanna Kama. And then we brought two different rabbis, sages, who prohibit, one who prohibits all of those, and one who prohibits only the she-goat, which was Rabbi Yehuda, says only if we can only go with its udders tied if it's to dry up the milk. Now, the next Mishnah is going to tell us things that nobody allows animals to go out with on Shabbos. Lo yetzi gamol b'mituteles. A camel may not go out with it's a patch cloth that was hung on its tail for identification purposes. It would have its name and its owner on it, and so that's how the Rambam explains it. And I'm reading here. Harashi, however, translates this as a pack saddle or small cushion attached under the tail to protect the flesh from becoming bruised. Okay, loy akud. You can't tie its front legs to and its back legs. So camels, if you didn't want it to run away, so you tie the front leg to the back leg with a chain, and so it can't make strides, and then it basically stays in one place. It can only move small distances, and it's not going to be able to run away fast. It's going to have to go very, very slowly. So if you want to keep your camel, from moving too fast or too far, you put on such a device. And you cannot tie back one of its legs up a bit, which would allow it to only move with great difficulty, because it only has 3 out of 4 legs, and the 4th leg is kind of suspended up just a drop. And so again, it's a similar idea, and it's a technique to make sure that the camel doesn't go very far. Now, this is considered an excessive restraint for the camel, as we have mentioned in the beginning of the Mishnah Aleph, that a camel does not require so much control. So this would be considered excessive. Other animals also cannot go with their 4 legs and back legs tied up like this, because there are other restraints that can tie it up and are much less excessive. Lo yikshu gmalim zeh b'zeh v'yinshech. A person cannot take two camels and tie them together and then pull one of them. And the reason for this is because it looks like you're taking them to the market, because that is the way you take camels to the market for sale. But a person could take each one has its own rope, and you could put them both into your hand, and you can schlep two of them together and pull the camels. Now the Mishna tells us a different rule here now, a different concern. So long as you don't wrap them and one around the other. The ropes, so long as you don't wrap them around your hand here. So the issue is that many ropes were made of wool and many ropes were made of linen. And we're concerned that if you're going to take these two ropes and you're going to tie them together in a knot or a double knot, so now you're going to take this rope. Here I have a rope. So let's say this one is wool and this one is linen, and you double knot it so that they tie together. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to wrap my hand around it. So now the issue is that I have wool and linen that's wrapped around my hand, and it's going to keep my hand warm. And there are many times that's a benefit in the winter if you have your hand wrapped around with a rope that's wool and linen. So now you're benefiting from wool and linen together, and that is called shatnez. And one is not allowed to benefit from the warmth of shatnez rope. And so therefore, says the Mishnah, be careful here, because many are wool and many are linen, and now you're making them, you tie them together, it's considered one rope, one garment, if you will, and now you're wrapping your hand in it. Mishnah Dalet. Ein chamor yetzis b'mardas b'zman she'in kshur alei. A donkey may not go out with a saddle cloth. In the earlier instances, we said that you can go out if it's tied. Here the Mishnah is telling us the flip side of that. That if it's not tied, so the donkey cannot go out with this blanket, saddle-like blanket. The leiva zug, you can't take your donkey out with a bell, afal pishu poku, even though it's plugged. Meaning to say, even though the bell is stuffed with wool or whatever, what have you, some sort of item which will disallow it from clanging and clinging around. Why? Because this looks like you're taking it to the market to sell. It was common when you wanted to sell a donkey in the market, you put around a bell so it makes a lot of noise and people see, and it'll attract more buyers to purchase this donkey. And you can't put it with a ladder on its neck. In today's day and age, you see a lot of times dogs, after they get fixed, quote unquote, they put on this funnel-looking item. I don't know what it's called in English. It's shaped like a funnel, and it prevents the animal from biting away and tearing away at its stitches. So this was a similar contraption when a donkey had an injury and they repaired the injury of this donkey. So they didn't want it to be able to maneuver its neck and its mouth to the injury area, so they would put on this ladder-like structure on its neck, and it would disallow him and disable him from chapping and touching the area and scratching the wound that was treated. And you can't take it out with a strap on its leg. You don't. They would sometimes put straps on its leg in order for the 2 feet not to knock at each other and cause bruising. Now, the reason you can't tie this strap around its leg is because the donkey moving often as it does, would often slip and fall on the floor, and we're concerned that the owner may then carry it on Shabbos. Chickens cannot go out with tags, identification tags, to allow it to know whom these belong to, or sometimes they would tag the males and the females. Good for kaparas. I wish they did that in these days. Nor with straps that are on their. You can't put straps on their feet, so that this allows them from jumping too high and breaking utensils and making too much of a mess. It keeps them grounded because they can't jump because their legs are tied together. So you can't send out the chicken into the public domain with this on Shabbos. Rams may not go out with it was a little wagon, like with little wheels. It's interesting that the fat tail of the rams, they would put it on there so that when they would walk, it would wheel their tail on the floor and not get it all bruised and ruined. So that ultimately, I guess, when they slaughtered it, there was some sort of use for this tail. And if it was all bruised, it wouldn't be good for this use, whatever use they would use it for after it was slaughtered. So again, they want to protect the fat tail. And so the point here is that this little mini wagon that they would attach to the tail that would drag along the floor and roll along the floor may not be used on Shabbos and allow this ram to go in the public domain. And the females may not go with these special henna chips that they would put in their nose, which would induce sneezing. And when they would sneeze strongly and get rid of the worms in their head. Worms would crawl up into their noses, and it would be difficult for them, and it would cause problems for them. So you could let it go out with these chips in order to induce sneezing. Male rams did not need these chips because they would knock each other in the head and they would butt each other with their heads, and this would dislodge the worms. A calf may not go out with a little yoke. A calf, they would take calves and would put on these yokes. It was like a training yoke, and the point of it was that when it got older, it would really be used to having its head down and be able to bear the yoke and not resist the yoke when it gets older. Now, you can't take a cow and put on a hedgehog skin over the udder of the cow. And the point was this, that when the cow would sleep, the farmers didn't want leeches to drink out the milk. So they would put in this hedgehog skin over the udders, and then when a leech would come, it would get poked by this material. And so it would disable leeches from suckling the milk. So again, this is considered a burden on Shabbos and for the animal, and it's not allowed to go out. The cow's not allowed to go out with it. Nor with a strap between its horns. An animal can't go. This was more ornamental, and it's considered. Sometimes they would use this or as a control for the cow, or an ornament or a control for the cow, but it's considered excessive. Now the Mishna tells us, and of course those who study the daily Tanya, we learn this in Tanya every year. The cow of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah went out with this strap between its horns, and the Chachamim, the sages, were not pleased with it. The Gemara actually explains that it wasn't his cow. It's considered, the Mishnah considers it as if it was his cow. Why? Because it was his neighbor's cow, and he didn't rebuke his neighbor. And the fact that he didn't rebuke his neighbor, the Mishnah scolds him and rebukes him and considers it that his own cow went out with it. He allowed it, but he wouldn't allow his own cows because the Chachamim, the sages, disallowed it, so he didn't allow it. But he didn't go as far as rebuking his neighbor when his neighbor's cow went out. At some point, he decided to do teshuvah, and for the fact that he didn't rebuke his neighbor, and he's fasted for so many days that his teeth became black. And again, so this is recorded in the Gemara. This story that his cow went out, and again, the Mishnah tells us, and the Gemara clarifies that it wasn't his cow, it was his neighbor's cow. And so therefore, he still had to do teshuvah because he didn't rebuke them. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now concluded chapter 5. Please join us next week, same time, and as we said in previous weeks, hopefully not the same place. Hopefully, with Mashiach Tzidkenu in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, the whole shul will be transported to Eretz Yisrael, and we will continue studying in shul with all of our friends. Hopefully by next week we will already be accustomed to our new residence in Yerushalayim HaKodesh with Mashiach Tzidkenu b'meira v'yameinu mamish. Amen. Have a very good evening.